So, welcome everyone to this RSA webinar. Now, I'm sure I really don't need to remind this audience that the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released its 6th assessment report just a couple of weeks ago on the 9th of August. It got lots of mainstream media coverage, and particularly the idea that we're now at code red for humanity. The report predicts more and more intense, frequent heat waves and prolonged droughts, melting glaciers and a dangerous rise in sea levels, and more extreme rainfall events. Importantly, the report also says that it's now incontrovertible that these changes are human-induced, not the result of natural cyclical changes in the Earth's climate. For those of you who don't know, my name is Meredith Doig. I'm president of the Rationalist Society, which is Australia's oldest free thought group. The RSA supports evidence-based policymaking by governments and the use of robust, reliable and defensible evidence in public debate about controversial social and scientific issues, principles that are well established or well illustrated by the IPCC's reports, but sadly lacking in the Australian government's responses to its messages. But tonight we'd like to focus not on what is not being done, but by what is being done. And while we at the RSA do believe in science and the power of the scientific method, tonight is not about the science of climate change, but what some in the community are already doing to help mitigate its effects. Now, just before I introduce our guest speaker, a few housekeeping matters. If you do want to ask questions of our guest speaker, if you can jot those in the chat box, and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible after the presentation. The webinar is being recorded, so if you happen to miss any of it, we'll upload it onto our YouTube channel in a day or so. Okay, now for our guest speaker. Brendan Liveris has worked in the construction industry for over a decade. Most of that time has been in logistics and operations management, but for the past few years, he's been a sustainability manager. Brendan's worked in a range of different business units across various countries in Europe, gaining a lot of exposure to different cultures with all the challenges and the opportunities that that exposure brings. He has an honours degree in law and a master's degree in business, and he's currently studying finance, which is just as well because he's also the RSA's treasurer. In his spare time, he's learning German and playing the guitar, and as I noted during our board meetings via Zoom, he's given in to getting a lockdown dog. He's got a gorgeous brindle greyhound. So without further ado, let me hand over to Brendan. Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Meredith. Thanks all for joining today. We're talking about a topic that I'm quite passionate about, and I think you'll see that come through in the way that I talk through this webinar tonight. Excuse me. And the title of the webinar is Climate Change, Business, Government and You. And so what I wanted to talk through is we hear a lot of negativity and a negative message and the message around what we're not doing around climate change. And I think it's worth pointing out some of the examples of where things are progressing and where there's good practice. And so we can take that as a good model on what to do and how to motivate further behaviour in our own lives and in our own organisations. So I'll give you a bit of an introduction of me, talk briefly about the IPCC report because there's some headlines in there that are very important, and then look at business markets and transparency and what that's turning into in business traction. Then a couple of examples of governments and cities here in Australia that are doing some good jobs around mitigating climate, and some of the things that you can be doing. But to start with, so as Meredith said, my name is Brendan Liveris. I'm a sustainability manager for a large concrete and aggregate or rock business, and this is me. Sorry, not that picture. This is me. This is when I was between lockdowns and was fortunate enough to get to the top of the Sky Deck in Melbourne here. And so a few things about me. I like boutique beers. They're probably too expensive. Really, playing loud music and dancing around and singing. Exploring the world and traveling when we're not locked down. And I think what that culminates in for me is, I would say I'm a perennial optimist. I think that if we look at things the right way and we focus on them, we can find solutions to things. And climate change is no exception to that. And so I have I would say maybe a more positive view than a lot of people. And I think some of that comes down to the role I'm working in and what I sort of see on the ground. So let's start with the report. So the IPCC report, the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, AR6, the Assessment Report 6 that was recently issued. So it had a stark warning, as has previously been said. And compared to the last report that was issued in 2013, this report highlights that there's been a 0.2 degree increase in the temperatures on the Earth's surface, taking us to 1.1 degrees above the pre-industrial levels. And the point that we don't want to get to, because we get to the point of irreversible climate change impact, is 1.5 degrees. So we're getting close, and that's a short period of time. Part of that difference is coming from the way that it was measured previously, but now what we have is a more accurate measure, and that 1.1 degrees is actually a number within a range, and it's the best guess there. So if we look at since 1850, there's been about 2.4 trillion tonnes of CO2 that have gone into the atmosphere. And in terms of our budget, for lack of a better term, of what the atmosphere can manage before we get to the 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial level, we have around about 500 billion tonnes to go. That's going to, previously it was thought that we would get to around about 2050, which is why you hear a lot about 2050 targets. And now it's more like in the 2030s. So our deadline just got closer, and that's going to drive a lot of different action. And I took a few snips of lines from the report that I think are important and worth pointing out. So observed increases in well-mixed greenhouse gas concentrations since around 1750 are unequivocally caused by human activities. Scientists rarely use the term unequivocally. The human influence is very likely the main driver of the global retreat of glaciers since the 1900s. Global surface temperatures have increased faster since 1970 than any other 50-year period over at least the last 2,000 years, and a high confidence in that view. In 2019, atmospheric CO2 concentrations were higher than at any time in the last 2 million years, and concentrations of methane and nitrous oxide were higher than any other time in the last 800,000 years. But the one that hits me most is the human-induced climate change is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. We are not waiting for climate change to come. Climate change is here, and it's affecting us now. I don't think we in Australia need to be reminded of that when we see the fires burning in a Mexican wave effect around the states. But it's impacting everywhere, and we start to see it with, for example, also the fires in the US that have just been burning across, and in other forms, flooding, cyclones, that kind of thing. So we need to forget that climate change is coming, and we need to recognise that it's here, and we need to take action. But the report is an alarm, and we need to act on it. But what I wanted to go through in this webinar was some of the good examples of things that are happening that are driving a benefit and driving action around climate change. So starting with businesses, markets and transparency. So I'll talk about a couple of market mechanisms that are starting to drive particularly publicly listed companies to take action and make the work that they're doing and the impact that they're having more transparent, and a couple of good examples from that. So the first one is science-based targets. So science-based targets, they're something it's an organisation and a structure that's been put together by the UN Global Compact, the World Resources Institute, CDP, which was formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project, and the WWF. So it has a very significant backing. So what this is about is organisations setting CO2 reduction targets that are science-backed. So it's not just putting a number on a piece of paper. It's something that that has been verified and supported. And so while we don't have anywhere near enough organisations that have done this yet, of the 1,000 odd that have already committed to science-based targets, they represent $15 trillion worth of market capitalisation. And of those, 200 of them have set targets aligned with ensuring that we keep temperatures below the 1.5 degree level. And quite proudly, I say that the business that I work for has set targets aligned with the 1.5 degree. And in fact, recognising other industry competitors in the cement industry have done the same thing, and there's a lot of work going on there to improve performance, just like there is in many other industries. And so what you'll see if you open up the annual reports for organisations now, they'll often have a section on sustainability. And if they haven't committed to a science-based target, many of them have committed to committing to a target. And I think you'll see an increase in the number of organisations that are committing to something substantial there. This is the list of Australian organisations that have science-based targets. Now, what you see here is something that I think is a little bit troubling, is the number of big names that we recognise in there is nowhere near where it needs to be. But there are some significant organisations that are doing great work. If I point out Lendlease here, a major construction company who are driving sustainable outcomes in their work. Transurban, who control a lot of infrastructure in Australia. And another number of other known names there, but 33 is nowhere near the number that we need to be at. And so I challenge you in discussions with your organisations: are they setting goals around science-based targets? Then we have CDP and TCFD. So the Carbon Disclosure Project, renamed CDP, has been around for about 20 years. And this is about organisations disclosing their impact on the climate and putting an action plan around reducing that impact. And so that can be cities or states and companies. And again, I'm happy to say that the organisation I work for, it has the highest rating level that you can get with the CDP, which is the A-list CDP rating. I'm going to talk to a couple of examples on this shortly, where there's some good work on this in other industries. And again, this allows transparency for both stakeholders and investors in seeing what organisations are doing. And then TCFD, so the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. So this is about giving stakeholders and investors information on the climate risks that a company faces. So are your operations exposed to, say cyclones or flooding? What are you doing about them? What happens when you're impacted by drought? And giving that information to the financial market. It's been backed by the Financial Stability Board, which is a peak financial body. And now we're starting to see that major economies are starting to talk about mandating this. So, for example, a couple of months ago, the G7 made a statement that they've called for the mandatory disclosure of climate-related risks, and some of them have started to act on it. France has set about mandating it, and Britain, the UK has plans to, and is talking about how it would be mandated in the UK. Recently as last week, Switzerland announced that all firms will be required to report against climate risks from 2024. So while this hasn't landed in Australia yet, some firms have started reporting against this already. So they're taking the action before they're mandated to do it. And so if I just recap on that, so the science-based targets are about setting the goal and making sure that there's an action plan to get there. The CDP is about having about disclosing the climate impacts and what's being done to mitigate it. And the TCFD is about what impacts are climate change having on the business and how are you mitigating them. Now let's have a look at a couple of examples. Oh, sorry. So if we look then at what's happening from an investment market specific basis, we've got Larry here. Now, Larry runs BlackRock, the world's largest fund manager. And BlackRock manage $10 trillion worth of assets on behalf of their clients. If Larry says to invest or not invest in a company, that has a very significant impact on that company. And so recently, this year, at the beginning of the year, Larry sent out his annual letter to CEOs, and there was a very clear theme in it. So he highlighted that despite COVID, the expectation was that sustainable investment would take a hit as a result of COVID. In fact, the opposite happened. Compared with 2019, in 2020, there was a doubling of investment in sustainable assets, and they recognise this as a long but rapidly accelerating transition. It's the beginning of a mega trend, not only in investment but in society generally. And so what he said to the CEOs is that you need to be reporting under recognised standards. So, for example, the TCFD and a similar one, the SASB. He's recognised that there's been a significant increase in the amount of reporting that is happening there, with companies reporting more, but that needs to go further. And so mandating it, as governments are talking about, will assist with that. But maybe the strongest and most poignant comment that he's made here is we are asking companies to disclose a plan for how their business model will be compatible with a net zero economy. This is your boss coming to you and saying, you need to fix this problem and show us how you're going to do it. And he said that it needs to be incorporated into your long-term strategy and reviewed by the board of directors. This is serious. So if Larry's saying it, then that needs to be acted on. Otherwise, you're putting the investment in your company at risk, and BlackRock will view it dimly in their investment portfolio. This certainly reverberated around the world, and we certainly felt it in the business that I work in, with rapid changes that followed. Similarly, though, it's not just BlackRock. Superannuation funds are driving some of this. They've got millennials that want to make sure that their investments are going into the right buckets. Millennials will be a major driver of sustainable investment going forward, and so this is driving superannuation funds. But on the other side of that, the other major group that's going to have a significant influence on forcing various players into more sustainable practices will be insurers. Soon enough, if major climate events happen and we're having cyclones more frequently, or floods or droughts, then insurers are ultimately the ones that have to pay, but we end up paying for it in premiums. But if that's not enough for you, the chart below here has a comparison between the S&P 500 index and then the sustainable variations on that. The sustainable ones are the ones where they pull out non-sustainable businesses based on an assessment. So, for example, arms manufacturers, oil producers, that kind of thing, depending on how they assess it. But what you see is you've got the middle line at the bottom there. That's the returns from the S&P 500, and this is the difference in returns from these different indexes. And what you can clearly see is in many of them, if they're either equal to or better than the performance of the general S&P 500. So sustainable investing isn't just about the environmental impact. There's evidence that there's good financial sense in investing and in returns. So a couple of examples. Woolworths. It surprised me looking a little bit further at really the work that Woolworths had done here, and it's quite outstanding. I mean, this is impressive enough. They put solar panels on this shop's roof in the shape of their logo, and they've done it on 126 other stores. Maybe not in the shape of the logo, but they've done 126 stores with solar panels, and that amongst other efficiency measures such as LEDs and reviewing their aircon strategies are tying together to reduce their emissions. Interestingly, they're looking at electric vehicles. And one thing that they reported in their sustainability report was the issue that they're facing, and the issue that I see also, is that we go to the market looking for solutions and are genuinely interested in paying for them, and the option isn't there. And so they ran into walls with some of their electric vehicle pilots, purely because there's not the supply there to deal with it. But really, where they've done an outstanding job is they're one of the 3 A-listed CDP companies in Australia. There are only 2 others. One of them is named Dexus, and the other one is named Vicinity Centres. There are 8 or 9 others that have an A- rating, but really Woolies stand out here. They've also set the SBTI targets, and they're aligning their reporting with the TCFD standards. I was having a look for other examples of such excellent performance in Australia, and really they stand out. And I was glad to see it. Beyond just CO2, they're also looking at how they engage better in the circular economy, how they design packaging, so it's either reusable, recyclable, or combustible, and then how they engage better in their communities as well. It was quite impressive. And then another example, LOreal. So I took an international example here. They've got 72 sites that are now carbon neutral production sites, and of the remainder of their sites, they'll all be done by 2025. That doesn't mean their products are carbon neutral. It means that their manufacturing facilities are, which they also recognise in their reporting. They too have SBTI validated targets, and they're also Carbon Disclosure Project A-listers. I couldn't find whether they reported against the TCFD standards because their annual reports were in French and I just couldn't work it out. But given that they're listed in France, they will be required in any case to report under that very shortly. So governments and cities. So it's quite easy to give the governments in Australia quite a hard time around performance in terms of climate change. And what I think there are some good examples, and actually quite a lot of good examples across all the states and the cities where action's being taken. Now, the federal government might not be moving quickly enough, but we see around action plans around CO2 reduction and engaging the circular economy, so moving towards more recycling and a different approach to how we, instead of make, make and waste, we recycle and reuse. There's some great action happening there. Now, just to highlight a couple of examples. So New South Wales, they have been working on an environmental strategy that they, a climate change strategy that they published last year, and there were a few things in there that really stood out. So they put together an electric vehicle strategy, which includes abolishing the stamp duty on electric cars that are under $78,000, which is contrary to what you hear in some other parts where there's further taxes looking to be leveraged upon them. Within that electric vehicle strategy, they're looking at charging stations and all the things you would kind of expect there, and looking to spend billions over the next 10 years. They've also set an aspirational net zero target, which I think probably needs to be a little bit firmer than aspirational, but they're at least talking about it. And they've got a CO2 reduction target of 35% by 2030 against a 2005 benchmark. That's not enough, but it's better than the federal government's 26 to 28%. Further, part of their plan is around supporting households, for example, with energy efficiency and solar investment. But then looking at the long-term, the bigger picture on innovation when it comes to new fuels and that kind of thing. But separate from CO2, they recently announced that they acquired 60,000 hectares of threatened biodiversity land, and they're looking to rehabilitate that and protect that. That was just near Broken Hill, and it was just another sign that they're taking some good steps there. Like I say, that's not to say that the other states are not. And then Adelaide. So Adelaide was one of 4 cities in Australia that also have the CDP A-lister rating. The other cities are Melbourne, Sydney, and Canberra. So all these cities have they disclose their CO2, and they've got a plan for reducing it. So what Adelaide? So in South Australia, they've actually done quite a lot of good work in decarbonising their grid. Compared to New South Wales and Queensland, and that have a kilowatt hour of about 800 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. In Adelaide, it's about half that. In South Australia, it's about half that, of 400 grams. So that's they've done a lot of work there, and I think we've seen some of that in the media. But they're also doing work around treating their roads to reduce heat absorption, which is such a logical good step. LEDs. If you're not using LEDs in your house, you should be seriously looking at them. They're cheaper and they save your power bill, but they use less kilowatt hours as well. And then fleet electrification. So you can start to see some themes on what the focus areas are. And as you see here, we have the charts showing the population growth in Adelaide compared to their CO2. And clearly they're going in 2 different directions, which is great news. Nice work, Adelaide. Finally, you. So in my view, the solution to climate change really comes down to the individual. And I've got a couple of key points that I hope hit home here, because there's a lot we can all do as individuals. So the first one is, and I apologise, these are probably might be a little bit hard hitting, but stop pointing the finger at someone else. And what I mean by that is we can complain about the government all day, and we can complain about corporations all day, but we need to look at what we're doing in our own backyard, in our own homes, in our own lives to make good decisions. And this stuff is what drives the behaviour of governments and businesses. And I'll give you some examples of that. But the next key point from this is put your hand in your pocket. So it might be at times, and definitely not all the time, but it might be at times more expensive to take the more climate positive approach. We, for example, paid for 100% renewable power at home here. And initially you put your hand in your pocket and you're spending more on it and you think, ooh, that seems like a lot, when really it probably isn't. But what I've found is it changes my thinking, and then I start to look at other things and go, or if I take the cheaper one, I'm taking the wrong path there, and I sort of guilt myself into paying more for a more climate positive outcome. So what else? So what can you do? So buying from companies that are taking action. The CDP, SBTI kind of companies, that's good. If they're reporting on it, great. But ask companies that you're speaking to what action they're taking around climate change, and support them, because it's the support by buying the products that drives the action. Invest in companies taking action. So with your super, for example, maybe you guide it towards ESG style indexes or whatever, but have a look at those kind of organisations, because they're the ones that are going to drive positive outcomes into the future. One that most of you may not appreciate or enjoy, but you could consider what I do. So I reduced meat from 90% of the meals that I eat each week. The reason I do that is because 1 kilogram of steak is responsible for around about 30 kilograms of CO2. If I turn that into, if I take fish instead of steak, I reduce that. And if I reduce the number of times I have that, I reduce my footprint from food. Moving to something like that significantly reduces your CO2 from your meals. Buy food closer to home. We have a dog that you might have heard bark, and she, when I'm buying her treats, I really can't believe that some of those treats are coming from Europe and the US. They don't need to. The dog's not that fussy, and we've got good stuff that's made here. Just have a look on the back of the pack. And one more, not directly CO2 related, but separating soft plastics in your bin. You'll be, a friend put me onto this. It was very good advice. You'll be surprised at how much you don't waste when you recycle your soft plastics through Coles and Woolies. And a few final remarks. So just to wrap up what I've said, the IPCC report is absolutely an alarm, and we do need to act on it, and we need to take it seriously. And it's not about tomorrow, it's about now. But there are businesses that are stepping up, and we should be supporting them and taking advantage of the things that the governments across Australia are offering up, because they are doing things. Supporting with infrastructure around electric cars will help with the uptake of that. And your small decisions will lead to many small decisions will lead to a big difference over time. We have to start making them right now. But I must leave you with this. There's a lot of negativity when it comes to climate change, but we are absolutely not down and out. We owe it to this guy and his generation to step up and knock climate change out. We have to take action now. We have the capacity to make this happen, and if we get moving quickly, we can make it work. So let's take the lead from many of the good examples. I've only given a few now, but let's take the lead from those examples and act now. Thanks for your time. Meredith, you're still on mute.
Try again. Okay.
Good. Yep.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Brendan. Really, really good. We've got a number of questions, and what I thought I might do is there are some questions that have come in prior to the webinar, and then there are some that have come in as you've been speaking, and so I thought I might just switch from one to the other as we go through. Yeah?
Yeah, great.
Okay, let me just start from a question from Pat McCarthy. Could you comment, and this is particularly relevant to the businesses who are supposedly doing the right thing, could you comment please on BHP and Rio?
In any particular context?
Do you have a view as to whether or not they're doing the right thing? Is it just greenwashing, or on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you say they are with respect to their sustainability measures?
I don't have a very clear view because I just don't have enough, and I'm not really close enough to them. But what I will say is the business that I work for operates in an industry very similar to theirs in that we're an extractive operation. And I know that they're having similar conversations to what we are with suppliers, for example, about decarbonising machinery and operations. And so while I don't know exactly what they're doing, I have heard of some of the actions that they're looking to take there. So it's we're very, very mindful of greenwashing, and we can't have that. We need to be very clear about what we're saying in the markets. But to be honest, I haven't seen anything that I thought was greenwashing from Rio and BHP.
Just a bit of a follow-up, Pat, saying that he's particularly interested in the BHP and Woodside deal.
Oh, the Woodside deal, yeah. So I'm not close enough to oil and gas, so I probably can't comment on that. I think for BHP, it's probably great because they offload their biggest CO2 problems, and we've seen that a fair bit in the market in terms of reporting for. Organisations reporting in their annual report and in their sustainability reports that they're reducing CO2 like total CO2. But if it's just from selling off an asset, that's not really the same thing. So it might look good on the CO2 bottom line, which is good for BHP. But you can interpret it in a number of ways.
Okay, let's try one. This is a question that came in before the webinar, and it's from John. And he says, what are we going to do with all the batteries? The wind turbines are very expensive to maintain. There's no easy solutions. One of the main problems is too many people. Also not an easy issue to deal with and not popular with a lot of people. Do you have any views? Well, let's talk about batteries first. What are you going to do with all the batteries?
Yeah, so one thing... I don't have a solution for the batteries, but one thing that I think we need to be talking about more when we're talking about climate change and environment generally is the circular economy. And I think what we will see with problems like batteries and anything that we have excess of is that organisations will be popping up and finding ways to recycle them. And we're seeing now with the stopping of the exporting of waste that there's a whole lot of innovative ways that are coming up to recycle things that we thought couldn't really be recycled before. And I think we'll see the same with just about anything. And in fact, my personal view is that we're on the edge of a boom in recycling that we'll see a lot of action from various players.
Okay, interesting. Wendy had a question which is about what are the pressures on countries that don't conform, that don't step up? And Australia is an obvious example, but from your knowledge of the intergovernmental institutions, what sort of pressures are there? What levers are there to make countries do the right thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know about the political levers there. You hear about the carbon borders that are being proposed, which I think are a really good idea. They should be imposed there for like places such as Europe, for example, to prevent high carbon options coming in cheaper when they're trying to drive CO2 down. if I read it right, I think what will end up happening is businesses in Australia will be looking to export, and their products will be viewed dimly in different markets, and that in itself will put pressure on our Australian government to take more action, for example, in decarbonising our electricity grid. Because if businesses don't have a good green solution to go to, then we will become uncompetitive in the global market.
Here's a question from Robin that she sent in before the webinar. Do you have a view about what the Australian government's goal should be for 2030?
Only based on what the other countries are putting up. So they're talking, which even now has changed. So one of the issues with the SBTI targets is they were good before the IPCC report, and countries had set CO2 reduction targets based on that AR5 report, the one that was released in 2013. Now, this report means that the most recent one that's released means that all the targets need to be reviewed if we're going to have any chance of being able to achieve the CO2 reduction that we need to. So while we've got targets set by, for example, the UK of a 55% reduction by 2030, that's probably not going to be enough now, and that's probably going to need to be revised to be able to avoid that 1.5 degree above pre-industrial level target we don't want to hit.
Here's one from Dinny Lawrence over in Perth, and she asks, is there a less CO2 intensive product than concrete that can be used in the building industry?
Yeah, it's a good question, and so we ask it regularly. So there's so one of the things that wasn't highlighted in the summary of the IPCC report was that but was in the 4,000-page document, was about the carbonation impact of cement and cement in concrete. And so what that means is concrete and the cement in the concrete go through, it's called carbonation, which is the sequestering of CO2 from the atmosphere, and it's the reversing of the reaction that causes all the problems when you're making cement. When you're making cement, you blow off a lot of CO2. It's the chemical reaction to make the core product, which is called clinker, that's then turned into cement. The CO2 goes into the atmosphere, and they're called process emissions. But when you have concrete in situ, it actually starts to reverse that action. And for the first time, the impact of that's been recognised in the report, and the estimate was that around about half the process emissions are sequestered through a carbonation process annually from the cement production. So that needs to be taken into consideration, but there are a number of levers for reducing the CO2 in concrete that already exist that are using alternative cementitious materials that either have no or low CO2, and businesses such as ours and our competitors are looking to maximise those to drive it down, and there's some really promising stuff there.
Okay, here's another one. Oh gosh, Wendy again has a question. When household solar panels put too much power into the grid and this causes a blackout, and when everyone turns on the air conditioning in summer, this will cause a blackout, why does one not cancel out the other?
I can't answer that one. I'm guessing it's the balancing in the load. We need batteries. We definitely need to be progressing batteries to support that out. Sort that out.
Okay. Oh, here's one from Jock. Is there value in cities and local governments declaring a climate emergency?
I think there is, because it puts then more political pressure on state and federal governments to act on it. Under some of them, I believe that by calling a climate emergency, it triggers different actions under whatever their structure is in those local councils. But sort of more practically, the more that we're talking about it, the more that we're making a bigger deal about it, the more it's going to drive action. And we see that in some local councils, the ones that have declared a climate emergency, that they're taking good action and they're helping businesses as well in their areas to move in the right direction. We have stacks of small businesses that just need some guidance on this stuff, and that's where local councils making a big deal about this kind of thing really helps.
Okay, thanks. Here's a comment I'll take from Jane Morris to everybody. We've seen the major influence ethical discourse has had in the medical arena, and Jane is very active in the Dying with Dignity arena. Shouldn't more emphasis be placed on the ethical nature of actions targeted towards climate change mitigation? In the words of Socrates, what ought we to do? Which I guess you've sort of addressed a bit at the last part of your presentation. But do you think that there should be more discussion, debate in the public arena about the ethics of personal behaviour?
Yeah, I 100% do, and from what I see, from what I've seen at least, there seems to be this transition where the issue gets raised and a whole bunch of solutions or whatever come into it, and then once say consumers or businesses get more sophisticated, they start choosing between different options that are there, and we do start to see that. I was just having a discussion the other day regarding land biodiversity offsets and the quality of land that's used to protect the biodiversity there, and how you enhance that. And as an extractive business, we buy land to offset for our extractive sites. But now there's discussion about what is the quality of the biodiversity on these lands and how do we improve that, rather than just getting a plot of land and saying that that's an offset. So I think we're just at different levels of sophistication there, and then we start to build more into the ethics and the better outcomes. But I do think that will come, because the same people that are pushing for climate action are the ones that are also pushing for ethical outcomes.
Okay, thank you for that. Denny's got another follow-up question. Which you may be able to answer or not. Do the soft plastics actually get recycled? There's a lot of skepticism about this.
Yeah, so it's not in your bin in your municipal waste. You need to separate them out, and Woolies and Coles have bins there that, as you take them in, you just drop them at the front. And so that the organisation that does that, they recycle those and turn them into a number of different things. But soft plastics have started to be used in asphalt, so the production of roads. One of the businesses that we have is starting to work with that now. Used for that same soft plastics is the same stuff that's being used for like park furniture and that kind of thing. And I think just with a couple of these little options, we don't have that many tons of soft plastic. We just need to avoid it from going to waste. I think it's something like, in Melbourne, it's something like 100 tonnes a year, or sorry, not 100 tonnes, 100,000 tonnes a year, or something like that. It's not huge in terms of what we use in resources anyway, and so we can do something about it.
I must admit, remember the time when, if you went to a supermarket, they would always give you plastic bags to take your food away, and then they stopped that and everybody complained for a while, and then you sort of change your behaviour and you get used to doing things differently. In the same way, I have a separate bag that I put all my soft plastics into, and every now and then the next time I go to the supermarket, I take that down and add the soft plastics. It's a matter of changing the habit, that you get into, and it's not difficult once you change that habit. Okay. Here's a question from Brad, who sent in the question prior to the seminar, and he said, well, I don't know whether you know about this group. He asked, will the group Citizens Climate Lobby Australia be likely to influence the adoption of a carbon price and dividend system? Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't. I do fully support a carbon price, and we're in one form or another. We sort of pay for it anyway to some extent. But I fully support a carbon price that'll drive action. But I'm not fully across that.
Okay, here's one from Mark Weeks. He says he's intending to buy an electric vehicle in the next 12 to 24 months. Can you provide any insight into the development, growth, versatility, brand versatility, and density of public charging infrastructure?
Yeah, it's terrible at the moment. I last year bought a car, and it's a plug-in hybrid. And the reason it's a plug-in hybrid is because there's not enough plugs if you need to plug in and you don't have the hybrid component, the petrol component. You can. There are apps though that you can see where they all are, but they're just often not publicly available. So if you download one of those apps, you'll get a bit of a sense. But one thing, I plug in the car every night, and it doesn't really drive that far on pure electric, but we don't even notice it on the power bill. So it feels like free driving most of the time.
And as you know, I've got a fully electric, and I don't drive very much in the country, but I think even if I were, it would cost me about $7 a week. But now I've got to pay a tax on it because I live in Victoria. Here's one from Matthias and Anna, who ask, do you know how many businesses are actually tackling the climate change problem? Could you give us a tendency or a percentage?
Oh, that's I don't know. I think it's becoming quite industry specific, and so I'm seeing that we're competing on CO2 now, and that's really started gaining traction in our products. But I think there's a lot of industries where it just hasn't hit yet. And I think the reason that it's hit our business, concrete, is because it's such a problem. But in other industries where it's less of a problem but is still problematic, it probably hasn't gained traction. So I don't have a real sense. But if the science-based targets are anything to go by, 1,000 businesses setting targets is nowhere near enough, and with those only 30 in Australia, and not even all of those are publicly listed, probably not enough. However, I do think the investor pressure will will motivate more action in the coming years.
Thank you. Look, here's a couple of, I'm just going to read these out because I think they're sort of comments rather than something that needs answers. From David, can we find a stronger, more impacting protest against human-induced climate change denial? Call out Morrison and Joyce and expose their irrational Christian Pentecostalist type of behaviour despite the unequivocal emergency. I think I'll take that as a comment. And another one from Monica, who says, really appreciate the examples of positive progress in your talk, Brendan, has given more hope. I'm wondering, though, if we've reached a point with the IPCC's Code Red warning where we need greater coordination in these efforts, nationally, internationally, within or across industries.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, and so I can only speak from personal experience here. But what we see is there's just not one solution in one part of a supply chain. You need the whole thing to come together, And for the business I work in, we're a vertically integrated business, and that's still not possible. We need regulation to support the action that needs to happen. We need businesses to be able to provide the products that allow us to combat climate change with reduced CO2, and then we need a customer base to be able to sell it to. And if you're missing any one of those parts, you have a problem. And that's, for example, with Woolies, they're the customer that wants to buy it. The regulation supports it, but they don't have a supplier. That's problematic.
Here's a really interesting question from Pat McCarthy. Do you think that company directors are exposed if they don't treat this as a risk management issue?
So recently, company directors were the legislation's changed or to some effect, but anyway, they're exposed if their organisations are caught greenwashing, which I thought was a really good and positive step there. So there's director liability. They're probably not technically exposed, but if you've got organisations like the BlackRocks of the world that are assessing businesses based on their risk, and you don't disclose the climate risks that you have, then your business would be automatically assumed as having a very high risk. And so if you're an investor and you're applying a high risk to a business, then you're going to discount the price of that business. And if you're a company director, you don't want the price discounted, so you need to act on that. So I think whether we have regulation or whatever here in Australia anyway, the demand from the investment market will drive action and transparency on businesses.
I think we've struck a chord with the electric vehicles. We've got another question. This is from George. He's thinking of an electric vehicle, but my diesel car has only 70,000 Ks on it, and he only drives at about 10,000 Ks per year. I can charge up an EV from my roof most of the year, but what about the impact on the environment of buying a new car compared with sticking with an old one?
So the car industry is really one of the greatest circular economy industries, really, because the car keeps going until a car keeps getting sold until it won't go any further, and then the parts get recycled. So while I definitely wouldn't say we should be going and buying new things all the time, from a purely environmental perspective, selling your car to someone else that can use it isn't throwing it away. But I agree we shouldn't go up and dig up more metals every year to build another car to then resell it. However, I think pretty quickly you would recognise the benefits that come from the electric cars, and if you're charging them off your roof, then you've got your cars costing you no carbon dioxide to run it, which is great.
I think I might just make this, it's 8:30, so we need to start wrapping this up. But I want to make this the last question, because it's actually come from a number of people, from David, from Steve, and from Mohan. And Mohan says, is there a conflict between religion and the concept of climate change? There appears to be a bias. Steve says, excellent topic. Does organised religion help or hinder climate action? And David says, how big a factor do you think religion is in climate change denial?
I would be definitely purely speculating. To be honest, I don't really think I can answer that because it's such a personal thing. I've driven past churches calling out the climate emergency. So I think it's probably more the individuals rather than the religion itself. I think that's all that we can assess from it, really.
I tend to agree with you, Brendan. I think it really depends on what type of religion it is, and then within that, even the individuals who may have different values themselves. Brendan, we need to wrap this up. So Brendan, thank you so much for everything you've put into this, for the work that you're doing within your own company, and hopefully the impact that you have across your industry and more widely than this. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And for everybody else, thank you for tuning in to an RSA webinar again. Before you all go, let me just urge you to tune in again next month, where we'll be focusing on the vexed issue of freedom of speech and its limits, and freedom of the media. If you think about it, in a crowd, if one person has a megaphone, they can drown out everybody else. And arguably, this is what's happened in Australia because of our concentrated media ownership. But before you immediately think of the Murdochs, think again. Over the last decade, the megaphone has begun to slip out of the hands of the Murdochs and over into social media companies. And this really is a hugely significant transfer of power. Our special guest speaker will be Dr. Margaret Simons, the author of many political biographies and an award-winning journalist. For many years, she's been a leading academic, training the next generation of professional journalists, and she was the founding director of the Public Interest Journalism Initiative, which advocates for an effective, independent news media. Please don't miss it. Watch out for our event, which we'll advertise on our website and in social media to everybody. That's it, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope you really enjoyed that, and hope to see you at the next webinar. Bye-bye, everybody.